Shungudzo, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Sean.
Appreciate you stopping by to tell us your story. I've been listening to your music and reading a little bit about you. So I'm looking forward to you telling the story because, as you said, everyone's got a story, but some are more interesting than others. So one thing that I read about you was when you were young, you kind of made a pact with yourself to write a poem every day, which is quite a commitment. How old were you, and what inspired that thought?
I was around 5. I had sort of discovered poetry as a way to express my feelings and observations about where I was growing up, and especially, I guess, the things that I didn't feel comfortable or wasn't allowed to necessarily speak about with my family or in my community. So it really sort of helped me uh, come to an understanding of myself and what was really going on. And I just decided I should do it every day for that reason. And then it turned into something more in which now I'm sharing them with people.
Yeah. I mean, you must have been a good writer. A lot of people are just learning to write around 5. So, did you start early? Was there something that inspired you, or someone else that you saw writing down their thoughts that was like, oh, I can do this? Or tell me a little bit about that.
Both of my parents are really amazing writers in different styles, and they're very committed to academics. So
Mm.
I started first grade when I was 3, and I was reading before that. Like I feel like I was reading when I came out of the womb, essentially.
Sounds like it, yeah.
My parents were very adamant about me reading, and then I came to really love it myself.
Do you remember some of the first poems that you were writing down?
I don't remember a lot of the earliest ones, but I remember when I really locked into wanting to write poems with a purpose, like poems that at the time I didn't necessarily have the guts to share them with people, but if I had had them, that I would have wanted people to read. And
Right.
those were about deforestation and a specific bird whose home was being destroyed.
Oh, well, I mean, it's funny because I feel like that's something that kids particularly can get on board with, but should stay on board with, you know? I don't know if you remember that old cartoon Captain Planet, you know? That
You're
was
so
that was
right.
that was popular with kids. So you start writing really early and then even realize really early that you want to kind of write things with a purpose and sounds like you wanted to do good, you wanted to contribute in some way. Do you think you got that from your parents as well, or were you seeing that in other places?
I think that it's so hard to say which parts of you are in, uh, you've received from your parents and which parts are inherently yours, which might actually be from someone generations back
Sure.
who whose values you resemble. But I know that I was sort of, and both of my parents can attest to, I was sort of born just really observational and really heartbroken over injustice and inequality. Like I could never really understand, even if you explained to me the reasons why, like because the government works like this and some people have and some people don't have, it would just break my heart. Like I didn't understand why the world had to be like that. And I feel like that that is what led me to writing poems with a purpose, in addition to my parents' sort of encouragement to do things with meaning to help
Right.
others.
Right, you were particularly sympathetic, and I think that's another thing. I think that when you're young, it seems so. If you hear about injustice, you want to do something about it, and as you get older, you can get jaded to that sometimes.
Yeah. Why
Um,
do you think that is?
Probably, maybe to protect yourself, I guess, maybe a little bit, just from the mental weight of it. Maybe that's one reason.
Yeah. Or maybe we all get so busy trying to stay afloat in our own lives that it's hard to look outside of ourselves and feel like we have the energy to do something for others.
100%. Yeah, I
If you
think.
take rent away, maybe more people will do good
Yeah.
things for people.
No, 100%. It's yeah, I mean people that's one reason people I think don't get more involved in politics or cultural changes that they'd like to see. It's because you just got to keep your head above water, you know?
Mhm.
So I know your background is of particular importance to you. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Zimbabwe, and then I moved to America. But Zimbabwe really shaped who I am and how much I value um, generosity and kindness and optimism, and also growing up in a dictatorship where a lot of things are going wrong in terms of the economy and the AIDS epidemic, which impacted a lot of people in my family. It also really instilled in me a desire to try to do something to help other people. I also recognized my privilege at a really young age, like in the fact that I could come to America. And it's not like we had money in America, but to even make that move was such a privilege. And so as soon as I moved here, I really took it upon myself to help people back home.
Yeah, how old were you when you moved over?
I was 10.
10 years old. Okay, so you're like 5th grade, already probably reading at a senior level from what it sounds like. So when you moved over, you were already interested in poetry, and at that point had already been writing down your thoughts. How well did you keep to that commitment to be writing every day? Were you pretty on it, or you know, because I know you can make commitments when you're a kid and then kind of lose track of them.
Um, I've been relatively on it. I've had phases in which I dropped out, but it was because I was depressed. And I feel like anyone who's struggled with depression knows that it seems so it seems so obvious that you would do the things that make you the happiest, but it's also so easy to sink into this sort of feeling of not even being worthy of the joy that you can give yourself. So I had some phases in which I stopped doing that. But I recognized it very quickly, like, oh my gosh, I haven't written poetry. I haven't done anything artistic in a long time. At the time, I was working in journalism, and that's when I took it upon myself to get therapy and also to really become proactive with writing and music again.
So you were writing for you know, since you were 5, and then at what point did you decide to join your writing with music?
It's interesting because I started doing it without knowing it. I never really thought that I was going to become a musician, only because my parents never really encouraged a career in the arts. They wanted us all to be academics because, you know, my dad as an immigrant and my mom as someone who grew up with very little in America and then went to school, both thought education was the only way to guarantee some sort of success in life.
Hmm.
Um, and I was, in a lot of stereotypical ways, a really good daughter. Like, even if I disagreed with my parents, I would do exactly what they told me to do.
Hmm.
It didn't occur to me that I could become a musician full time until I was in college.
Mm.
But before that, I had been writing songs. Like, I went to a convention to speak about HIV, AIDS awareness and prevention in Toronto when I was like, I don't know, maybe like 14 or 13 or 14.
Wow.
And I wrote songs about AIDS and prevention, and I presented those to the people in the conference room. And
Wow.
and yet it never hit me that I wanted to be a musician. I just made songs for educational purposes.
Right.
Um,
You thought it was a way to engage the audience, you know, a way to get your point across.
yeah.
What kind of music were you doing keyboard with it, or was someone else playing along with you, or how did the music accompany it?
Ever since I was young, like the first time I decided I wanted to record music, my little sister had a little keyboard that I would use, and my mom had one of those earphone, like the Britney Spears, but she used it for Skype things,
Uh-huh.
and so I would record the vocals into that. And she had I don't even remember the name of it, but she had this program in which you could record voicemails to someone, but you could layer them. It wasn't technically a musical program, but I would use that to make songs. I was really crafty in
Yeah.
terms of that sort of stuff. I thought at the time that reverb could only be achieved by being in a room with reverb. So I would go into the bathroom. I remember hearing Christina Aguilera Genie in a Bottle, and that sort of muffled effect on her voice.
Uh-huh.
I went around the house trying to figure out what it was. I decided it was to sing through an empty toilet paper roll.
That's
So
awesome.
it sort of just made effects. But I guess in a way I was always producing,
Yeah.
just without all of the tools that people use.
Totally. I mean, some people would call that even more legit than using a plugin, you know. That's real analog stuff, you know, going into the bathroom, using toilet paper rolls and all that.
Yeah.
So yeah, you were experimenting with music and performing music in a meaningful way, really early. So when did you start taking it more, you know, taking it more in a formal direction? I know you said college was the time. What were some of the moments that in college where you changed from I'm a student to hey, I might want to pursue this as a career?
Um, I think that sort of wanting to pursue music coincided with realizing that I was in school for something I had no interest in. Um, and I started first grade when I was 3, and I always took in when other kids had summer vacation. I took more classes. Like school was the thing that I did, and even when my dad and I played, we would do science experiments. Like they found a way to make academics part of everything, which was really fun for a long time. But I almost got pushed a little bit too hard.
Mm,
Um, and in college, I had a total breakdown in terms of going from being a phenomenal student to just feeling really lost. And at the same time, I had a recording set up and I started making more songs, and I found a lot of joy and like enthusiasm about the future from that. So I started to go on online, like MySpace, and like Facebook was still pretty new, but MySpace still existed. And
mhm,
I would look up the people who either produced or engineered or mixed um, songs I liked, because I figured the artist would never respond to me. But if I could
mm,
get through to the mixer or an engineer, they
yeah.
might want to make songs with me. So I started hitting many people a day up, hoping that some of them would respond. And I eventually was able to connect with producers. There was one in Texas and an engineer in New York. And I wouldn't recommend this, but I lied to my parents and told them I was doing other stuff, but I was
Oh.
actually meeting up with men from the internet. I was pretty
Yeah.
safe about it. I was pretty
Some
safe
dude
about it
in some
though.
old guy who said he's gonna make me a star in a different state.
I did a lot of like sort of uh, investigation on the people I was seeing, and
That's good.
I would get my own like motel room
Hmm.
and really suss out the situation before I was alone with them.
Right, right. That's good. I like the disclaimer. That's the good daughter in you, letting everybody know that you might want to do your homework if you before you decide to meet up with a total stranger. But you know, obviously these were people who had worked with artists that you liked, so they were at least somewhat vetted at first.
Yeah, and there were
In
some
addition,
people who were really shady. Like I think the biggest producer who at the time had a lot of hits was like, "I love your music. Let me fly you out." Other people, I'd have to buy my own ticket, and this
mm,
guy was like, "Let me fly you out. Like
hmm.
we can work together." And then a day before, he texted me and said, "I can't wait for you to get here and give me a massage." And I was like, "I am
Ah.
not coming."
Oh man.
thank, thank you for making it clear what you were after before I
Yeesh.
arrived.
Yeah. At least he did that. um, so you start working with these producers, and I think that's good advice. I think sometimes we think of the artist, but a lot of times, many times, at least part of what we really like is what was done in the production phase of it. So and since you wanted to be an artist yourself, it was probably better you were reaching out to the engineers and the producers as far as going forward with your career. So
Yeah.
so you start working with some of these people, and did any of those sessions turn into any of the things that we've heard from you?
Um, Nothing that you've heard recently. It was like 10 years ago.
Okay.
So I did make a lot of music and I learned a lot, and I met some wonderful people who taught me a lot. Kind of back to your what you were saying about producers, I think that engineers and mixers are really the unsung heroes of music, and a lot of them do operate as songwriters and producers too, but aren't credited for their contributions. So I
Sure.
wound up with a lot of brilliant people who knew more about sound than a lot of producers do, and were able to really teach me to be self-sufficient and to produce. There's this amazing guy, Stuart White, who is a phenomenal mixer and engineer today. He was then too, who sort of made it his mission to help make me self-sufficient and to teach me about even songwriting. Like at the time I didn't know a song had to have a chorus. I was like, but why? Who says so?
That's funny. Yeah, the a mixer, it's amazing listening to some songs before and after they're mixed. It's really night and day sometimes. So that's 100% true. So that was 10 years ago. So you started working on stuff in college, and how did you go from some of those early works to some of the great stuff you've put out now?
um, oh my gosh. So I was making music full time for a couple of years, but it just wasn't a situation in which I felt like, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to grow in the ways that I wanted to grow. And it was really isolating. Like I didn't have management or any representation. It was just me and the people who had signed me. And and I didn't get to meet anyone else who worked in music. I was really isolated. So I felt a bit stuck in spite of, like even today, I'm really grateful for the things that I learned in that situation. I just didn't feel like I was going to grow from that in the ways I wanted to. And I also, at the same time, was sort of having this conundrum in feeling like I had disappointed my parents.
Mm.
Um, and so I quit music and got a job in journalism. And
Wow.
I did that for a couple of years, and I completely stopped music. I sort of felt like, okay, I attempted the dream. Now it's time to be a grown up, in my mind. And that's because I was really allowing sort of like the voices of my parents to echo in my mind. Like music isn't a career, and they had sacrificed so much in order for me to have an education too. So I think I think when we have moments like that with our parents, even though it seems like what they're doing is trying to break our hearts and stop our dreams, we have to consider all that they did in order for us to have the things that we have or take the path that they wanted us to take.
Sure.
And so at that moment in time, I was like, okay, it's time to please my family. And I want to be able to support my mom full time. She's worked so much of her life, and um, shouldn't have to work anymore, in my opinion, and has had a pretty hard life, And so I just decided that in order to help her in the ways I wanted to, I had to quit music. So
Mm.
I went into journalism, and I went into journalism thinking that it would be the best way for me to use my words to make a positive change. But the sect of journalism I was in, it was around when clickbait came about and all of these things that sort
Sure.
of got in the way of really telling stories that open people's minds to what's happening outside of, their immediate surroundings.
Right.
So that began to like really frustrate me. And same time, I found music again as a way to ease my frustration. So instead of working 5 a.m. until midnight, a lot of days in journalism, I would choose to not sleep in order to make music, and that would energize me more for the next day, at a job I didn't want to have. And that made me realize I really should be doing music because I'm willing to make any time, even time I don't have, in order to do it.
Sure.
And I also started to realize that it was the best way to use my words to make a positive change.
Yeah, it's interesting that you come from a journalism background and you're trying to um write meaningful um articles or stories. But you're right, it's so tough to break through the clickbait culture now of basically for profit news.
Mhm.
um but and then so all of those things, I think so many people can relate with, especially artists, the money that you need, or money for your loved ones, versus your passion. So when you first made that decision, how did you bridge that gap? You had a paying job, and then you had to decide to move into music. So tell us a little bit how you bridge that gap.
I gave myself a limit of $5 a day for a really long time. I think it was like 8 months or so,
Wow.
in which I couldn't spend more than that. Obviously, on some days you just would, and some days you really want a beer or whatever. But it was like trying to be really rigid about how much money I spent on groceries and entertainment and I mean, aside from that, it just felt like I've never had a moment in my life in which something went the way I wanted it to go if I wasn't willing to take a leap of faith and if I wasn't willing to take a risk. And in my mind, I knew that I would never be able to support my family in the ways that I want to or help people in the ways that I want to if I wasn't doing something that I was passionate about.
Hmm.
Um, I really admire people who can be brilliant at things they don't love. Like, I think that takes so much strength and courage,
Yeah.
and that I don't have. I'm only good at stuff that I love. And so I realized that actually doing what I wanted to do and pursuing the arts, was at the end of the day gonna fulfill my purpose of helping my loved ones and helping others even more so than um, journalism.
Right, because you have endless energy to make that work. So tell us a little bit about how you did make it work. What were some of the things that you started seeing, where you're like, okay, I'm on the right path here?
One of my rules with myself was that I couldn't quit my job until I could write, record, and produce and, semi mix a song at a level that I wouldn't be totally embarrassed to play it to a professional.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really like working on, and I really wanted to be self sufficient because in my previous musical situation, I relied on other people to make a song. And I know a lot of writers and artists who struggle like that too. Like, for example, in quarantine, who are sorry, my dog is crying. I'm
That's it.
sorry. He wants
We
to
we
go
can't even hear him. Zoom has a pretty good background filter,
outside.
but yeah, I haven't heard him. But if
I
he wants
didn't
to
want
join
people to
us,
be like, she's just letting her dog cry. Um,
no, I didn't hear any of it.
Essentially, like I feel really bad for writers and artists who in a time like this are sort of struggling to make music whenever they feel like making it because they have to set up a Zoom or a
Yeah.
call or risk their health or other people's health in order to make music. So um, learning to be self-sufficient was really, really important to me. And that was something that I wouldn't let myself quit my job until I could do.
Now, when you say you wanted to be able to make a track that was good enough for professionals, is that so that you could, in essence, say, "Hey, do you want to work with me on this song?" So that's what it's not so that you could you yourself DIY just put out the track, but it's so that you could convince collaborators to join up.
It was both. It was that and really not having to rely on a man for anything.
Uh-huh.
um, to be honest, like not
Uh-huh.
having to feel like I previously felt like I worked with people because I needed to, but not because I wanted to, which
Right.
can put you in the room with a lot of shady characters.
Sure. As
Uh,
you found out.
and I wanted to be in a position where I was working with people because I wanted to, not because I needed to.
Right. So you get to that point, and tell us a little bit about how maybe you grabbed a demo of yours or something and brought it to somebody. Were any of those some of the first things that we've heard from you? Because I do want to get to some of your more recent singles and things that you've put out. But yeah, tell me a little bit about some of those first successful collaborations.
I mean, some of that stuff led to songs I've written for other people, but I very quickly got thrown. I showed demos to people, and I wound up with my phenomenal publishers, Big Deal, who are now Hypnosis. Um, and I immediately got thrown into sessions in which I was writing a lot of songs for other people, doing that every day, and sort of writing and producing my own music was put on the back burner. Um, but I'm grateful that I took all of that time to write for and with others because one, I don't think that any one person's story is the most important story that will change anything. I think that we need to collectively be telling stories with a purpose in order to do something. Like we need to do it as a music community, not just as this person and that person.
Right.
And also because I just learned a lot about songwriting and production through sitting in a room with producers every day and writing songs every day with people. And I had always wanted to, I got into music with this vision that I was going to release my own music, but I just watched years pass by without having done so. So when quarantine happened, I set a goal of, writing and producing an album at home. And it was also to see if I could. I didn't know if it was going to be okay, like
Uh-huh.
I didn't know if I'd like it, much like if anyone else would respond to it. But I really wanted to see if I could do those things, like start and finish a project. And I also really wanted to get back to why I started making music in the first place, which was to use my skills to try to spread messages that unify people and make people feel less alone.
Yeah, and speaking of that, you've gotten some great recognition for some of your more conscious songs. Time Magazine. How did it feel to be recognized by Time Magazine? Was that for "Long Live the Billionaire"? And if
Mhm.
so, tell us a little bit about that song and what it's about.
Um, I wrote that song. I had been in an Uber. I don't drive, so I'm really not going anywhere right now. But I was in an Uber with this man. I used to just sit in the front seat, and if someone wanted to talk, I would listen,
Mm.
and I would end up meeting the most remarkable people and having conversations about cultures or experiences that I would never have conversations about amongst my peer group. So I felt like it was
Mhm.
such a great way to really come to understand the diversity and also like common thread that holds people together. So I met this wonderful man who was or is a Vietnam veteran, and I asked him deep into this conversation, like an hour in, just like what was the greatest impact that being in the war had on you? And he said, when I went, I was a boy, and when I came back, I was a man, and I could never get back that sort of innocence. Um, and then we started talking about his feelings about war in general, and about having to do the things he had to do. And it really hit me like I had always been so anti-war to the point that I thought soldiers were bad guys too.
Mhm.
It really hit me that there are these people out there fighting for things they're not even aware of and just doing what they're told, who are also sort of pawns in political games. And so I wanted to write a song about that.
Wow. So I gotta say I'm loving the new single. It's a good
Thank
day
you.
to fight the system. It's I mean, I think it's rare. It does happen, but it's rare to have such a good timey kind of rebellious song. It makes you feel good, but at the same time, kind of puts that little fight the man vibe into you while you're listening to it. What inspired that?
I mean, I've always loved artists who, excuse me, who are able to, you know, I love to I love many kinds of songs, but in this context, two kinds of songs. I love songs that are just as sad or angry as they want to be about subjects that make people sad or angry. Like I love songs that don't have a happy ending. I think a lot of pop music today, a lot of music in general today is like, well, let's just add that happy twist and like make the singer the hero of the scenario, or make
Oh,
everything okay in the end. And I really appreciate songs or artists who don't do that. But I also love songs that are about really tough circumstances or topics that make you kind of want to dance to them, or that you
exactly.
can
Yeah.
relate to. Like there's Bob Marley, who wrote some of the most violently political, in a good way, like pressing for freedom songs I've ever heard, and yet people just kick back and smoke weed, to
That's
his songs.
exactly who I was thinking of when I said some do it, but not many. So that's funny
Yeah,
you mentioned him.
totally. And there's Fela Kuti. Like, it must have been a few months ago. I love tomatoes, and and I grew a bunch of them this year, and I was sort of rearranging the vines and cleaning them up, and I was listening to Fela Kuti, and it was a beautiful Sunday afternoon, and I was just like, this is so wonderful, what a nice day. And then I clocked into the words, and I was like, oh my God, like how amazing that I feel relaxed, but I'm also ingesting these messages. And so I wanted Good Day to Fight the System to be in the spirit of that. I think that, you know, people have been oppressed for a very, very, very long time. Um, and people have been fighting to end oppression and for equality for a very long time. And I think that when we're in these fights, it's so easy to become hopeless or exhausted. And I wanted to create something that reminded people to feel enthused about what we're doing, like to feel to be excited when people are protesting, because it means people are finding their voices and understanding their collective power, to be excited about an election in which we have the power to change the course of history, to like really take in that personal power that we have, and then more importantly the power we have together, and to be happy about it.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I think it's important for any if you want positive change to do it with a positive attitude sometimes, and so it's nice to hear. It's kind of you said you like to put some put a message into something that you can dance to. It's kind of like a spoonful of sugar for the medicine.
Totally. But on the other hand too, like on a lot of my upcoming releases aren't necessarily that happy, because there's some stuff that just sucks. So
Right.
I think it's really about balance, about acknowledging the pain that we're going through, or that other people are going through, and like really allowing ourselves to feel that. But then at the end of feeling that, trying to find optimism and strength, or a way out of it.
Right. So Shun, what do you have coming up next? What's in your future?
Oh my gosh.
Short term. Let's not think too big. I don't want to overwhelm you, but anything are you writing right now? It sounds like I mean, are you keeping up? Are you still writing every day?
Yeah, I'm writing poems every day. I'm wrapping up a really special project that I'm going to start sharing next year. And I'm also writing on a few other people's albums, artists that I love. Like I said, I think that, you know, obviously, I don't think that anyone can be an artist unless they prioritize themselves as an artist. But I also really I love helping other people tell their stories. Um, in the most meaningful ways possible. So I guess that's all in my future. Just trying to become a better person.
All right. Yeah, I'm trying to help everyone else become a better person. So keep up the good work. In the meantime, we'll be listening to the new singles. Did you call that an EP, or is that just a single? That's a single, right? Because you got about 3 songs on there along with It's a Good Day to Fight the System.
Yeah, It's a Good Day to Fight the System is, definitely the one that I really want people to feel and ingest. I feel like it's always a good day to fight the system, like there's obviously we need to take time to celebrate the things that we've accomplished, but there's, until no person is suffering due to the color of their skin, or their gender, or you know their sexuality, or whether their legs are functioning or not, or I just think that we need to continue to maintain sort of that positive spirit and that enthusiasm, and carry that into trying to make more change, have more conversations about the ways in which we as individuals and collectively can do better.
Definitely. So, Shun, we like to end the interview by asking if you had one piece of advice for aspiring artists, what would it be?
I have to think about that. You know, I want to make
Yeah,
sure.
think about it, ponder it.
Um, there's so many things that I'd want to say, but I think that the most important one is, and obviously, like, I quit music for some time, and I was able to come back to it with a renewed love, but also I came to a realization that um, it sounds so obvious, but it sounds like something my dad would say. I'm becoming him. Um, um, you can't fail if you don't quit.
It's a great way of saying, you know, something that I've heard over and over again, and you know, cliches are cliches because they've been said so many times, and you know, and so there's probably truth to them. So yeah, I love that attitude.
What about you? You talk to a lot of artists. What would, like, over those conversations, and what would your advice be?
Well, I got to tell you, I've been speaking to so many artists this year, just over Zoom, like the volume. And so I've been I've been telling my fiance, some of my friends, like it's been super inspiring. You know what I mean? It's like getting firsthand inspiration just injected into my head like every day. So it's been really awesome. But like I said, what you said, and it makes me believe these things because I've heard them over and over again.
Mhm.
So you have, you know, said something that so many of these artists have said just over and over, which is don't give up. You can't give up. You know, you can't doubt yourself. Some other things that you've said that that I've heard in different ways is, you know, you got to do it your own way. You know, it sounds like you're doing it because you have a message. It sounds like, you know, but whatever the reason you love music, you know, stick with that. Don't be too influenced by outside influence because there's a niche for everybody nowadays in this world. You know, there's the internet has opened up the gates to every single niche out there. You don't need a record company who has a particular formula that they want you to fit into. And so as long as you, you know, I think you need to have some talent, and that comes with time and perseverance. But if you work at it, you can get into that niche, and people will appreciate it. So yeah, it's one of those things. It's that cliche, never give up. You know, it's and I think that's probably the number one thing that people have reworded in different ways,
Mhm.
and also do it your own way. You know, trust your instincts, kind of thing, because you can get really lost trying to follow someone else's path or what you think other people want you to do.
Totally. I totally agree with that. And I feel like, you know, as for never giving up being cliche, it is, but at the same time, when we're all at our lowest and we're riding sort of those waves of life, what we're feeling at the lows is this, like, sense, this feeling of giving up on ourselves.
Yeah.
Um, so it's a part of the human experience, but one that we have to sort of like be willing to ride through and come back on the other side with certainty in who we are.
I will say, I after all of these positive, inspiring thoughts, and he did have an eventual inspiring thought, but I had the chance to interview Dave Mason, who he was a member of a, you know, rock and roll Hall of Fame group, Traffic, and also part of Fleetwood Mac for even a couple years. So total legend. Um, and I asked him that question, and I said, you know, Dave, what, you know, what one piece of advice would you give to aspiring artists? And he was like, good luck. He just like hit his, he was, I think he was smoking something during the interview, but it was such a funny, just like G thing to say. But then he went on to basically say the same thing. You know, you can't give up if you really want to do it. You got to be obsessed, is what he said to a point. He didn't
Mhm.
use the word obsessed, but he said basically you have to be what kind of resembles selfishness sometimes, for the art. So I thought that was hilarious. And then he gave some good advice, also along with it.
That makes sense. Well, there's good selfish and there's bad selfish. There's willing to hurt other people to get what you want and putting yourself first in order to achieve your goals, which will allow you to help others.
Exactly. And that's what I said something similar. I said, it can appear selfish maybe to someone who doesn't see what you're doing. But in a way, it's selflessness for the art. You're putting the art in front of you. He was saying he would sleep on floors or, do all these sorts of things, while he was coming up, so which a lot of artists can relate with, touring in vans, sleeping in the car, sleeping in a dirty hotel, it's all for this thing that you care about. So it is selfish in one way, but it's also selfless in another. Bringing it backward.